At 89, people assume the hardest part of old age is being alone. It isn't. The hardest part is being forgotten by people who are still alive, the ones who could call and don't. If you're spending tonight alone, comment one word, here. I want us to find each other. And if someone you love is growing old by themselves, don't share this. Just call them. That's the whole point. Here's the day I understood the difference. February 10th, 2022, a Thursday. I had been ill for 4 days, a cold, nothing alarming, the kind of thing that would have been minor at 50 and at 86 required more managing than it used to. I was in the house. I made coffee in the morning and soup at noon, and I went to bed early, and I woke up the next day and did the same. On Thursday morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I noticed the phone on the counter. I had not picked it up in 4 days. Nobody had called. Not Daniel, not James, not anyone. I had been ill in my house for 4 days, and not a single person had thought to check on me. And sitting there at the kitchen table, I understood something I had not understood clearly before, though I had been approaching it for years. There is a difference between being alone and being forgotten by the living. Those are not the same condition. I had been managing the first one for 2 years. The second one was something else. I want to be precise about what I mean, because I think the distinction matters, and because I have found, in the years since that Thursday morning, that most people hear being forgotten and assume I mean loneliness. Loneliness is a feeling. Being forgotten is a fact. Loneliness is what you feel when you want company and don't have it. Being forgotten is what you are when you exist in the world, but do not currently exist in anyone's mind. You can feel lonely and be thought of simultaneously. Many people do. You can be alone and not forgotten. Many people are. What I encountered on that Thursday morning was the specific and particular experience of being a living person who was not, at that moment, in anyone's thoughts. Not because I was unloved, because I was not thought of. Those are different. I was a veterinarian for 40 years. Small animal practice, Columbus, Ohio. I retired in 2003 when I was 67, and I was not the kind of man who struggles with retirement. I had interests outside the practice, a marriage that had been good for 40 years at that point, and that I valued, a house that needed attention, grandchildren who were growing. The years between 2003 and 2020 were good years, not spectacular. I am not a spectacular man, and I have never required spectacle from my life, but solid, purposeful years with Marion in the house, and the ordinary rhythms of a retired couple who like each other's company and have figured out how to spend their days. Marion died in March of 2020. She was 85. We had been married for 54 years. She had been a kindergarten teacher for 28 years, and she was the more naturally social of the two of us, which is a thing I understood abstractly while she was alive, and understand concretely now that she is gone. The house had, while Marion was in it, a quality of presence that I did not notice until the quality was absent. I will not tell you about the grief at length because the grief is mine, and it is ongoing, and the telling of it is not the point of what I am trying to say. What I will tell you is that after Marion died, I made the adjustment to being alone, the practical adjustment, the daily adjustment, the adjustment to the silence of a house that had not been silent in 5 decades. I made it. I was 84. I had been my whole life a man who was comfortable with his own company, more comfortable, truthfully, than with most other people's company. I arranged my days. I cooked for myself. I kept the house. I found a rhythm. Being alone was hard in the way of anything hard, and I managed it. And by the end of 2020, I had achieved something like equilibrium. The equilibrium was real. I want to say that because I think it is important not to confuse what happened on that Thursday morning with ordinary grief or ordinary loneliness. What I had achieved by 2021 was a genuine, daily, workable life, a life with structure and routine and moments of genuine interest and even, occasionally, contentment. I fed the birds in the yard every morning and I read in the afternoon, and I had a standing call with my college friend Robert on Wednesday evenings, and I watched the news and I cooked my dinners, and I went to bed, and I got up, and I did it again. This was not a diminished life. It was a smaller life than what I had before, and it was adequate, and I was managing it without drama. Robert is 87. We met in 1956 at Ohio State in a chemistry class that neither of us particularly excelled at, and we have been friends for 68 years. Robert moved to a retirement community in Phoenix in 2021 after his wife Dorothy passed. He complains about it with some regularity. He calls me on Wednesdays and he tells me about the food at the dining hall, and about his neighbor who plays the television too loudly, and about the organized activities that he mostly declines. I miss being able to make my own decisions about when to eat, he said to me once. This was a Tuesday. He had called on a non-Wednesday, which meant he had something specific to say. I had not been called in 9 days by anyone, which I noted, as I sometimes note things, without doing anything about them. Robert wanted to talk about the indignity of a fixed dinner schedule. I listened. I did not say what I was thinking, which was, Robert, your daughter calls you every day. Someone notices when you skip breakfast. You are not forgotten. You miss your house. I miss existing. There is a version of this I want to tell carefully, because I do not want you to think my sons are bad men or indifferent ones. Daniel and James are good men. Daniel calls every 2 or 3 weeks, a solid, warm call, 30 or 40 minutes, in which we talk about his work and his children and what is happening in Seattle, which is a city I have visited 3 times, and that is very far from Columbus. James calls every Sunday, more reliably, shorter. He asks how I am and tells me about Charlotte and his wife's garden and how the grandchildren are doing in school. These calls happen. They are real. There is love in them. I am not telling you that my sons don't love me. I am telling you that between Daniel's calls and James's calls, there is time. And in that time I exist in this house and in no one's thoughts. The specific thing that happened in February of 2022 was this. I became ill on a Sunday. By Wednesday I was feeling worse, not better, which was mildly concerning, and would have been less concerning if I had someone to be mildly concerned alongside me. I knew, if I thought about it, that James had called the previous Sunday, 8 days before the Thursday morning, and that the next call would be Sunday, which was 3 days away. I knew that Daniel's last call had been 11 days before. I lay in my bed on Wednesday evening with a fever that was manageable but unpleasant, and I understood that nobody knew I was lying in my bed with a fever, not because they didn't care, because they didn't know, and they didn't know because in 11 days, neither of them had thought to call. I want to say something about my own role in this, because I think honesty requires it. I did not call them either. I could have called Daniel on Monday morning and said, I'm not feeling well. The fever is up a little. I just wanted someone to know. I could have called James on Tuesday. I did not call anyone. This is the specific habit of a self-sufficient man. The habit of not putting yourself forward is something that requires attention, of handling what can be handled, of not being a burden to the people who love you and are busy with their own lives and don't need to add worry about you to the list of things they are managing. I have had this habit for 89 years. It has served me well in most contexts. In this context, it collaborated with my son's busyness to produce a Wednesday evening where a man lay in his house with a fever and was not in anyone's thoughts. What I have come to understand in the years since that Thursday morning is the mechanism that produces this specific kind of forgetting. It is not indifference. Indifference would be easier to name and easier to respond to. It is something more ordinary and more difficult to fix than indifference. It is the structure of modern lives, which are full to the edge with their own contents, and in which the person who is not present in the room is not present in the mind unless something actively produces the presence. I am not in Daniel's daily life in any form. I am in Seattle, and he is in Seattle, and there is no intersection of our daily lives that would cause me to enter his thoughts on a Tuesday afternoon. James calls on Sundays, which means I enter his thoughts on Sundays. In between, I am in Charlotte, in a house I have not visited in 2 years, and James is in Charlotte, in a life that does not contain me until the Sunday alarm reminds him to call. I spoke to Robert on the Wednesday after the cold, the regular Wednesday call. I told him about the 4 days. He was sympathetic in the way of a good friend who is also 87 and understands the specific vulnerabilities of being 86 and alone in a house with a fever. He said, "You should have called me." I said I knew. He said, "Or called Daniel." I said I knew. He said his daughter had called him 3 times that week. She called every day, but 3 times in 1 week because she had noticed he sounded tired on Monday and was checking. I said that was good. I meant it. I was also aware, in saying it, of what it described. A daughter who called every day, who had a daily habit of her father's existence, who noticed when he sounded tired. Robert had been admitted to a community, partly because his daughter insisted, and partly because he agreed, and partly because, after Dorothy died, the alternative was the same thing I was doing, which was being alone in a house, managing, being fine, not being thought of. The retirement community, for all Robert's complaints about it, does one thing that I cannot replicate in my house. It places him in proximity to people for whom his presence is part of the daily structure. The staff knows his name. The woman at the table next to him at dinner knows if he didn't come down. The activities director notices if he skips the Wednesday bridge game. These are small notices, and they do not constitute deep knowledge or meaningful relationship in all cases. But they constitute something. They constitute being a fact in someone's daily awareness. Robert is a fact in his daughter's daily awareness, and in the awareness of the people around him in the community. I am a fact in Daniel's awareness every 2 or 3 weeks, and in James's awareness every Sunday. In between, I am a man in a house in Columbus who exists completely and is not currently in anyone's thoughts. I want to give you a specific example of what the forgetting looks like from inside it, because I think the abstract description is harder to feel than the concrete one. In April of 2023, I had a birthday, my 87th. Daniel called in the morning, a good call, warm and full of genuine feeling. James called in the afternoon. My grandchildren sent messages. It was, by the measure of birthday contact, a full day. The next day was a Tuesday. Nobody called. The day after was a Wednesday. Robert called, as he does, and we talked for 40 minutes. Then Thursday, then Friday. By Saturday morning, 6 days after my birthday, I had not been called by Daniel or James or anyone in the family. Not because they didn't love me, because the birthday had been the occasion, and the occasion had passed, and I had returned to the background of their lives, and the background does not generate calls. This is what I mean. The birthday is not the measure of whether you are thought of. The Tuesday after the birthday is the measure. The Thursday when nothing is happening and nobody has a reason to call. That is where I live. That is where most old people live. And the Tuesday and the Thursday are very quiet. There is something I have noticed about the way concern for old people is organized, and I want to name it because I think it is part of the mechanism. Concern in modern life tends to be organized around occasions and around visible distress. If I fall, someone will call. If I go to the hospital, someone will come. If I miss a birthday, someone will notice. The concern is available and real, and it activates reliably in the presence of a visible event. What is harder to organize, what the structure of modern life does not naturally produce, is the concern that is not waiting for an event. The concern that arrives on an ordinary Tuesday not because anything has happened, but because the person who is old and alone exists in someone's daily awareness, and that daily awareness generates a call without waiting for a reason. That form of concern, the anticipatory, ongoing, unreasoned awareness of another person's daily existence, is very difficult to maintain at a distance. It requires intention. Modern life does not naturally produce it. It has to be chosen, deliberately, against the current of a life that is already full. I want to tell you what the difference between being alone and being forgotten feels like from the inside, because I have had substantial time to observe both, and they are not similar. Being alone is a physical condition. It has weight and texture, and you adjust to it the way you adjust to other physical conditions, with time and routine, and the specific discipline of a life organized to be sustainable without constant company. I adjusted to being alone. The adjustment was not simple, but it was achievable, and I achieved it. Being forgotten is not a physical condition. It is an absence in the relational world, the specific absence of being a current presence in the minds of the people who know you. You cannot adjust to it the way you adjust to physical aloneness. There is no routine that fills the absence of existing in someone's thoughts. There is no discipline that makes it manageable. It is simply the condition of being alive and unknown, from moment to moment, to the people who love you and are somewhere else, and are not right now thinking of you. Here is the distinction I want to give you, as precisely as I can. Being loved is a state. Being thought of is an action. These are not the same thing. Your children love you. I am willing to bet on this. Most children love their parents, even the ones who are not good at showing it. The love is real. The love is also, frequently, a state that is not currently being activated, a feeling that exists somewhere in the background of a busy life, and that surfaces when the person is present or when a reminder arrives. Love that only activates when reminded is still love. But it is a different experience to be the recipient of it than to be thought of consistently, without reminder, as part of the fabric of someone's ordinary days. I also want to say something to the people who are old and alone and listening. The people who are in the same house I am in, sitting with the same coffee, watching the same phone. I want to say something that nobody says clearly and that I have had to learn at 89. You are allowed to call them. You are allowed to put yourself forward as someone who wants contact. The specific habit I have described, the self-sufficiency, the not burdening, the waiting, is a habit that was useful in other stages of life and that now works against you. I know why the habit is there. I have it. It comes from a generation and a temperament and a set of values that equated asking with weakness and self-sufficiency with dignity. But at 89, in a house alone, the dignity of not asking has a cost, and the cost is the Thursday morning at the kitchen table with a fever and a quiet phone. You are allowed to call. You are allowed to say, I was thinking of you, and I wanted to hear your voice. You are allowed to put yourself in their thoughts by reaching out, even when you wish they would reach first. They may not reach first. They are busy and they love you, and they are not thinking of you right now. You can change that by picking up the phone. Your dignity is not diminished by needing to hear from someone. It was never contingent on pretending you didn't. I want to speak directly to the people listening who have an old person in their lives. A parent, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, a neighbor of a certain age who lives alone. I am not going to tell you to share this, or to send it to someone, or to do anything elaborate. I am going to tell you one specific thing. Call them. not when something reminds you, not on their birthday, not at Christmas, not when you happen to think of it, though all of those are good. Call them on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing has reminded you. Call them on a Wednesday morning for no reason. Call them on a Thursday when they are 4 days into a cold and don't know yet that you're thinking of them. 15 minutes. You don't need a reason. The absence of a reason is the whole point. The call that requires no occasion is the call that tells them they exist in your thoughts, not just when the calendar says so, but in the ordinary, unremarkable middle of an ordinary day. That is what is missing, not love. Love is there. I know it is there. What is missing is the call with no reason, the Tuesday afternoon with nothing prompting it, the evidence arriving unexpectedly that someone who is somewhere else in the world thought of you today without being reminded and picked up the phone. That is the difference between being loved and being thought of. And it is a significant difference when you are 89 years old and you have been in this house since March of 2020, and the phone is on the counter, and the coffee is on the table, and the birds are at the feeder, and you are alive and present in every room of this house, and not currently present in anyone's thoughts. I want to say something about what happens to an old person when the Tuesday call arrives. The call with no occasion. The call that begins with nothing more than, I was just thinking of you. I want to say this because I think the people who make that call sometimes underestimate what it does. It does not simply provide company for the duration of the call. It changes the quality of the day. It changes, in a specific and measurable way, the quality of the following days. Because for some hours or even days after the unexpected call, the person who received it carries the knowledge that they existed in someone's thoughts on a Tuesday for no reason. That knowledge has a weight to it. It pushes back against the specific weight of the forgetting. A person who has been thought of on a Tuesday for no reason is not, for those hours or days, forgotten. They are remembered. And being remembered, being a fact in someone's ongoing awareness, rather than an occasion that is managed and moved past, is the thing that separates the bearable kind of alone from the one I am describing. A Tuesday call, that is all. The threshold is that low. The impact is that large. I am not telling you to do this out of guilt. I am not interested in producing guilt. Guilt produces the obligatory call, the call that sounds like an obligation because it is one, and the person receiving it can hear the obligation in the voice, and the call is kind, but it is not what I am describing. What I am describing is the call that comes because you thought of the person, because something small, a smell, a street, a word, put them in your mind and you picked up the phone instead of letting the thought pass. That is the call that changes what it means to be old and alone. Not the organized visit, not the holiday, not the birthday. The Tuesday afternoon call that begins with, I was just thinking about you. If you are spending tonight alone, comment one word. Here, I want to know how many of us there are. And if you have someone who is spending tonight alone, someone you love who is in a house somewhere being fine and not thought of, don't share this. Call them. Right now, before this is over. The phone is there. They are there. That is the whole thing.